Logos features a number of ways to search in a biblical text, along with resources that help parse out the search results. The easiest way to do this is to simply right-click on a word and search for it, but there are a number of details that can help fine-tune the search even further. Today we will look at the right-click menu, lemma searches, and the literary typing feature. When you are in the ESV or most other Bibles and you right-click on a word, like I will do with pray, a menu will pop up that gives you a range of ways to search. The menu is two-toned, the left half being white and the right half being gray. We'll look at the gray half first. So the gray side gives us selection options for what we're right-clicking. So if we look at this top option, it says pray, which we right-click the word pray in Matthew 5:44. That's our selection. We can also do your enemies and pray, which it's not quite the phrase, it's kind of the phrase or the clause. Then we have Matthew 5:44. We can do the whole reference, and you'll see it all highlights. And those are all English options that we can do. If we work our way down, the next thing we can see there are four options: the manuscript, lemma, root, and morph. So these options are starting to work with the Greek and with the parsing from the original language. And so to start, the manuscript is the exact Greek word. So that pray in English had the exact Greek word that would have been there in the Greek text. The lemma, which is the next option, is the Greek word's lexical form. Or it's the form that if you look for it under a dictionary, that's where you'd find it, or in a lexicon. The lexical form is like if I were to say I ate a hamburger, the word ate there is the past tense of eat. And so if I was looking in a dictionary, I'd look under eat and find ate there. If I looked under ate, it would say see eat. And so that's the lemma form. The root gives you the root form of the word, or it's where the word came from. Where a lemma search of pray will only show us verbs, the root form will show us any nouns or other verbs or adverbs or adjectives or any other type of word that has the same root. And so it's a little wider than what a lemma search is. The morph search, if you'll remember from when we made the visual filters, this is telling us this verb is a present, it's either middle or passive, and there's more information there, but we can actually search and we can look for any verbs that are in the same tense, the same mood. You can search that as well. There's also down here, there's the Greek Strong's number, the Louw-Nida number, the Bible sense. There's also person, which is another way that Logos tags. And then there's there's event, speaker, and cultural concept. For right now, we're going to look at the lemma search. So the search we're going to use is the lemma search. This search is the one most suited for making observations on the level of the text. We will look at other right-clicking options in a later chapter, but for now we want to click on lemma, so you'll see it highlights white, so that means that's the one selected, and all of the options over here are connected to that. After we click on it, we're going to choose search. So there's copy, you can copy the word, you can visual copy, you can do all these things. The thing we're going to do right now is we're going to do search this resource. So now we have the lemma, prosuxomai, which is pray, and then we have all of the verses that have it in the New Testament. Won't be in the Old Testament, there's no Greek in the Old Testament. So in the search window, you'll see a lot of things that we've seen before. There's these drop-down menus here. We can choose the Bible. Again, we can do all that kind of stuff. We want to be in a Bible search when we're doing this. It will automatically do that, but if you click off of it, you'll lose your search results. There's a couple different ways we can look at it. There's the grid, which is kind of a way to, it makes it very, I don't know, I don't see much difference between grid and verses. I think verses is more pleasing to the eye, but maybe grid is faster to read. But then there's also aligned, which aligned is it puts the word that you search for in the center on all of them. And so you'll see some of them, it occurs at the beginning or end. There's also analysis. Don't worry about that right now. We'll get into that later. You can graph results. You can do that by book, by chapter. You can do that. There's a lot of things with that. Again, some of this stuff we'll look at later, but there's all those options. For now, we're going to stay in the verses view. So the search right now covers the whole New Testament, and we can see every lemma of pray that occurs in the Bible, but we want to be more specific with our observations. We're in Matthew, so let's look at how many times this word is used in Matthew and start making observations based on that. So if I click on all passages, and then I'm going to make a new reference range. And so there's these two text bars at the bottom, and in the first one, it's my reference range. I'm going to type in Matthew, because I want the whole book of Matthew. Then I click on the range title, and I'm going to call this 01NT Matthew. Now, the reason we're doing this naming convention is because it's the first book of the New Testament. And then Matthew, this is a way to just have them all in order. You'll see I've got some weird things going on up here, but these always organize alphabetically. And so by doing 01NT Matthew and then 02NT Mark, it makes sure they'll be in order. And so that's something, if you have some time, might be worth doing. So I click Save. And now, and it says 2 on mine because I made this earlier and had to restart the video. But now we'll see it's only showing results from Matthew. So with this setup, we can now see all the times pray occurs in Matthew. This search helps us to observe how the Greek word for pray occurs in Matthew. It can help us ask better questions. For instance, in Matthew 5:44, we see the first mention of pray, and it's in a command. I could now go here and see if he explains more on how to pray, and then look later in the book for examples building on this. This is a base level observation, but it can help me start to see the theme of pray. So if I'm looking for prayer in Matthew, I'd probably want to start here, or if I'm looking for this lexical term prayer in Matthew, I'd want to do that. There may be other Greek words that are prayer that Matthew uses as well. That's for another time. But we want to make our observations with genre in mind. To make our observations better, we want to consider more than just he said pray, he said pray, he said pray. We want to look at what the context was when he said it. And so in Matthew 5:44, we know Matthew 5, that's part of the Sermon on the Mount, and all these other are part of the Sermon on the Mount. And then we get down here, and now it looks like it's a narrative. So we want to be able to see that, but Logos actually is a tool that can help us see that better. For instance, an example of this, in Matthew 24:20, it says, pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. So this instance, I think Jesus is probably being figurative. Earlier he says, pray for those who persecute you. I don't know if he's necessarily saying you should also be regularly praying that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. I think that might be like pray that doesn't happen. It seems like it might be a figurative thing. That's my first observation, and so I'd want to look into that. I'd want to start observing that, and one of the things we can do for that is we can look at a tool called the literary typing tool. So when we go to open this tool, it's under Guides, Passage Guide. So we click on that, and now it'll open us a passage guide. Now when these open, depending on how fast your computer is, this might take a while. I'm going to hit enter because it was waiting for me. But I want to do one on the whole book of Matthew. So I hit enter. So now all of these things are working on the whole book of Matthew. You'll note there's all kinds of stuff here. These are all useful in different contexts. For right now, we're only going to look at literary typing. And in fact, I'm going to just close everything else. And so you can't close the top one, but if you highlight or hover over each of these, you can see an X on the far right. I'm just going to click all of them off. So, and I just click, keep going. Logos will even try and sell you more stuff in there. But now I've got Matthew, and now I want to name it. So I click on that drop down, and I'm going to call this 01 NT Matthew, cap lock, Matthew literary typing. And then after I do that, I'll click off, and then I go up to add. I'm going to add literary typing. So now we have our literary typing. And to give you an idea of what this does, so Matthew 1 through 17, that's the genealogy of Jesus. It tells us genealogy, and then we see narrative, infancy. And so if I hover the mouse over that, it tells me that narrative infancy, an account concerned with the birth and early life of Jesus or John the Baptist. And then if I go quotation, so here's a passage quoting another text, usually the Old Testament. And if I click on more, and I keep clicking on it, it'll take a little while because it's a big book, but I can eventually get all of this here. And we want to do that. And at the end, we're going to make a layout so you don't have to do this every single time. Still going. But as you can see, there's all types of different, there's subgenres inside of the gospel. Some of it's where Jesus is preaching their sermon. Some of them, there's sayings that are legal. There's apocalyptic. There's all kinds of things that we're going to see through here. And so you want to do this, even though it takes a little bit of time. There we go. So now I've got all of Matthew, and the last thing I'm going to do, you see all this dead space. I don't need all that dead space, so I'm going to click and hold and move it, and then slide this over. And now I can see this, but I can also focus over here on my information or even pull up the text. But so the thing you can do with this is I can look at, so I've got Matthew 5:44 up. I can scroll down and I can see that Matthew 5:44, the person who put this resource together at Logos, he sees Matthew 5:17 through 48 as us saying legal. And so it's a passage reflecting Jesus' views on observance of the Old Testament law and what God really requires of his people. So that's kind of how he categorizes it. And if I go down to that 24:20 I mentioned, it's categorized as, where are we at? It's a saying apocalyptic, a text teaching about what will happen leading up to the end of the age and what things will be like in the age to come. And so on a base level, this can start to help me see, well, in one of these, Jesus is preaching in one way. He's focusing on the old, and in one it seems like he's focusing on what's to come. And so when I look at that, I can start to ask better questions, because I don't say, how are these two exactly related? I may start to say, okay, what does this one mean? What does this one mean? How do they, are they part of the same thing? Are they separate? There's all kinds of observations we can make, and this helps us make sure that we're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And so these tools help us trace themes and make better observations about the text. They also help us to ask better questions. We can look for patterns, or we can see where there's breaks from patterns. Using this layout can provide an inductive way to study the text. So last thing we're going to do real quick, now that we've got this set up, so we're going to go up to Layouts and click. And then if you scroll up, you can do Save as Named Layout. And I'm going to call this one, I'm going to use that naming convention. I'm going to call it 01 NT Matthew Literary Typing, and then hit Enter. So now if I was studying in Matthew again, I could come back in and do this the same way. So that's all for this video.